Greetings, everyone. Welcome. This is Tonson. This is the March 13th, 2019 Brilliance in Commerce Trust webinar or video conference on Zoom. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us. As you may know, those of you who have been with us, and welcome to everyone who is new, new subscribers, new viewers. Brilliance in Commerce is a project of La Verite, which means the truth. House of Freedom International Natural Law Trust is one of our flagship products, and Liberty Debt Elimination System has been relieving suffering of hundreds of families. And we have wealth building systems, credit repair, gold purchasing concierge, offshore asset protection, Monaco Management Group, wealth management, cryptocurrencies, and more. We are members of the Worldwide Charter for Fair International Commerce, and you'll see more about this on the website. Today being March 13th, 2019, our next trust webinar will be April 17th. However, I also wish to inform you, April 10th, we're going to have a private study group for existing trust clients. We will be sending out a newsletter about this. It is not announced here on this visual, but for those of you who are already natural law trust clients, there will be a private webinar or private study group conducted by our good friend and affiliate Dominique Hackett in Santa Barbara, California. For those of you who have not already subscribed to the Brilliance in Commerce newsletter, please do so at houseoffreedomtrust.com with dashes between each of the words, and click on newsletter sign up. For those of you who need a phone number, it's 360-200-7521. My name is Tonson Fairmont. I'm the founder of Brilliance in Commerce, member of the Board of Advisors, Monaco Management Group. I've been a speaker on radio shows and former offshore investment seminars, author of Sovereignty Consciousness and the forthcoming Cosmic Renaissance. We call these trusts international because they are above and beyond the usual statutory limitations, because they operate under the universal right of private contract. Contract law transcends a local provincial statutes in the sense that everyone on the planet has the right to enter into private contract and not be interfered with by any government as long as they're not harming anyone or violating anyone's rights. So the international, global, universal right of private contract is the basis of the natural law trust, and it is affirmed in that body of law called the Uniform Commercial Code. The benefits have been a best kept secret of the super rich for generations. So people have been enjoying asset protection, freedom from the lawsuits and the risks and the forfeitures and the confiscations and the taxations and the other requirements of long lists of red tape and bureaucracy that beleaguer the in-the-system statutory trusts, such as so-called living trusts and charitable remainder trusts, attorney-created trusts. These trusts are the ones that the super rich have used privately, not informed the public, not taught the lawyers in law school about. So less than 1% of 1% of the attorneys are familiar with them. They'll usually tell you to stay away from them. They're afraid of them because they don't understand them. It's fear of the unknown. So generally, we do not deal with attorneys. Most of them are, bless their hearts, for all good intentions, brainwashed and uninformed. Rather, we rely on an international network of experts, of scholars, of consultants, paralegals, people who know the law. And one of them you will be hearing from today, Randall Hillner, one of the best, who has studied with some of the greatest mentors in this field. And we have stayed out of trouble, kept clients out of trouble, and continue to guide our people correctly. For generations, this has been going on successfully, so there's no reason for it to stop anytime soon. Randall Hillner is the director of the trust department here at Brilliance in Commerce, founder of House of Freedom Trust, White Light Unlimited, trustee of One People's Public Trust, and the creator of the International Natural Law Trust. Today's webinar is about duties and liabilities of beneficiaries. As you may know, the trust is like a table, 4 legs on the table. You have to have an absolute irreducible minimum of 4 officers on your trust. One is the grantor, also known as the settler. One is the beneficiary, and then 2 are the trustees, 1 current trustee and 1 co-trustee or successor trustee. Those 4 people have to be the minimum to make a trust work. And then you can have additional officers if you wish, such as protector, secretary, president, manager, and so forth. But there must be at least 1 beneficiary, 1 grantor or settler, and 2 trustees. So today we're going to talk about the beneficiaries.
Well, hello again, everybody, and welcome to our Zoom webinar on this beautiful day on Kauai. And I welcome you all here, and hopefully someday you all get to visit here. It's a beautiful place to spend a week or 10 days or 2 weeks or maybe a lifetime. And we've been doing this for, I think, almost a year, and every month, and it's been delightful because it's pushed me to research more and more for everybody's questions, and it's been delightful. And today we're going to talk about the beneficiaries. We've touched upon them before, and but we'll go a little deeper. So if you can connect me back with, you are just going to sit on the trust, you're not going to open up an account. In the meantime, you're going to know how to get an EIN number specifically for the trust, and you want that to have that ready to go, whether you're going to do a present activity or a future activity. So when you have that, you're going to have that involved with the trust. You can have that number on the trust document, and then you're going to make, of course, you make copies of the whole trust. And specifically, you make copies of the trust indenture, which is about 13, 14 pages. And then you make a copy of the abstract of the trust, which contains a synopsis of the whole document. And when you hand those to the banker, typically the banker will say, okay, that's good. And he may want to read through the rest of the trust document, which is okay, except I would say that the one part that you want to cover up or clip together so that he can't have access to it are the minutes of the trust, because over time you'll be adding minutes based on the activity that you do on a daily basis or a monthly basis for the trust. If you're just waiting for the exchange, then that may not be any more than every quarter or every half a year. You get together with the trustees and you say, there's been minimal activity or no activity, and you make a note of that. And when you have the trustees, you and the trustees will sign. And if the settler is different than you, then they will sign. And then you store it with the trust document so that in the future you're ready to go. Now, if you want to use the trust on a daily basis, which I do all the time, I think Tanzan does too, you are going to go to the bank now or whenever that's important to you, and you'll go to the bank and you'll present the same documents that I just talked about, and you'll have a checkbook and a debit card for the trust that you can use on a regular basis. You'll have to open the account for a minimal amount of dollars, and whatever that is, you'll have to do it. Just open another account with another bank last week, and he just wanted to see certain pages, and it was set to go. So that's the basis of that. Now, the tips are, just make copies of the trust indenture, as I said, and the abstract. That's going to be the key, because the abstract is about a 6-page synopsis of the trust, and it tells you and the trustees how it's all going to work, or it tells the banker how the trust is going to work and what role you're going to play in it, what role the trustees are going to play in it, etc. Now, some banks will want to have the trustees sign on the bank note of the bank card. Some banks, especially if you have a relationship with a bank, they won't. They're not necessarily going to demand that. But lately, because of the banking control situation, usually or typically the banker will say, I need to have both the trustees sign. When I went the other day, I took my co-trustee and we went, and all he did was take our photo IDs, so he knew that we were the people presenting the document. We were who we said we were, and 15 minutes later we walked out. We deposited a certain amount into the account, and it's good to go. So that's basically how and what to present to the bank. And if you are a client, feel free, if you're feeling stuck or you need more information, then you can call or email me. And if you're not a client, then I would ask you to write first to a Brilliance and Commerce office and say you're looking for certain information from Randall, and they will either answer what they can there, or they will send that request along to me, and I'll take it up from there. Now, one of the things that happens sometimes is if you're going to be a new client, you pay forward, you pay your money, you either pay in full, which is a good thing to have, especially with the potential for the exchange to happen. And if you're not, and you're just using it for daily activity, then you're going to want to contact the office and get tips on how you can do it and get the process going on how to get your trust available. Even if you have minimal amount of money, then consider the monthly process that we have. And you'll have, what happens with that is, one is I'll find the receipt, I'll get the receipt in an email from the office, and I will give you a day or two, and then I'm going to write back to you, and I'm going to say, okay, where's your information? Because I can't start writing the trust without certain names and situations involved on the trust client form. So I'd ask you to make sure that if you don't hear from me in a couple of days, if you have paid whatever it is, and you don't hear from me, then please write to me and say, okay, here's my form, or I can't get access to the form, or I've misplaced the one that I have, and I will get back to you as soon as possible and get you a form, and we'll start to go. And questions can come along with the form, and in the process of making you have, the information comes to me, and then you get back the basic. If you pay in full, you're going to get the whole trust, which is anywhere from 34 to 40 pages. And you're going to have to go through it and learn about it and read about it. And that's what these webinars are about, to help you gather the information and have the understanding and knowledge so that you can go successfully into the bank and then into the field of work that you want to use that with. I have clients that have substituted their LLCs or their sole proprietorship business, and they've just either put it all into the trust, or they have, some people have an LLC, and it's easier sometimes to make the trust, your new trust, a member of that LLC rather than shift the LLC. Some places they ask for a certain amount of money to disband the LLC, and there's a lot of activity that can be in transferring a business to the trust, whereas a trust can be simply a member of that process, and then it goes from there. So those are all questions that you might have, and we are in a place where we deal with it. That's what I do, and go from there. So if during this presentation you have any questions, please write them down and be willing to ask the questions according to what we're going to present today, and also anything that you might have you might have a trust already and you have questions around that, we can cover that as well. Okay, so we've got the bank account opening ready to go, and now let's talk about the beneficiaries. All right, duties of the beneficiaries. In general, the beneficiaries have no obligation to the trustees other than to make sure that the trustees, the duty of the trustee is to also serve the beneficiary, but the beneficiary in general is in no obligation to support the trustee or the other beneficiaries. It doesn't mean that they can't talk together. A lot of times family members are the beneficiaries, or maybe friends of the grantor or beneficiaries. And generally you want to keep it private that you might be a beneficiary, but there's no reason that you can't talk together and ask questions to the trustees, but they have no obligation basically to the trust. Their duty is to just make sure that the trustee gives them their equitable interest in the trust, depending on the percentage of beneficial interest that they might have. You got, if you go back and remember about the duties of the trustees, if the trustees have a legal title to the assets in the trust, and the beneficiaries have equitable title. There's a difference. One is legal title, and the trustees don't necessarily have beneficial interest in the trust, although they may. And the beneficiaries typically just have a beneficial interest in the trust, and their duty is to make sure that the trustees have give them the interest that they deserve. And they don't have to indemnify the trustees, but they can. So that's a choice that you need to make. But generally, when the trustees are, you're familiar with the trustees, or you know them, or they're part of the family, then you don't have to contract with the trustees. They're already under a contract with the trust to make sure that the trustees pay the beneficial interest to the beneficiaries. Now, along with that is that the beneficiaries cannot condone anybody to create or hold a breach of trust. So if the trustees are not doing their job, then the trustee is a beneficiary. You don't want to go along with that trustee. You have a right and you have a duty to go back to the board of trustees and say, I think this trustee is creating a breach of the trust, and I want that to stop. Now, some of the beneficiaries, sometimes the beneficiary will take that, the trustee may give that particular beneficiary a little bit more money than he deserves. And if that happens, then he's condoned and gone along with that breach of trust. And that's something you don't want to get involved with, because that messes the whole trust works out. And you eventually will have to pay restitution to the trust if you had been unjustly enriched by the trust. In other words, you've gotten more than your fair share, then the trustees can step forward. New trustees could possibly step forward and say, I'm sorry, you owe us money because you went along with this breach of trust. So be really careful of that. Okay, next. So remedies against a beneficiary. So remedies, in other words, if the beneficiaries are just unjustly enhanced, in other words, they are getting more than their fair share, then the other beneficiaries have a right to say, hey, I think this beneficiary has created a breach of trust, and I would like the trustees to either change the role, in other words, get another trustee if one of the trustees is guilty of a breach of the trust, and the new trustees will either fire the old trustee for breaching the trust or make him pay restitution. And you literally, in the trust document, there is an ability to sue and be sued both by the trustees and by the beneficiaries if any wrongdoing has taken place. Now, there is a little paragraph in the trust that we give so that if the beneficiaries are complaining too much and is not a justifiable complaint, then they literally, the trustees, have the ability to not pay equitable interest to the beneficiary until they feel that the remedy has been solved, and then they can go forward with being beneficial interest and having equitable payment for what they do. And what that also means that any creditor and anybody that's got a contract with a trust, if they are, if there's a breach of trust by the trustees or the beneficiary, then the creditors can come and put pressure on the trustees or threaten suit because there is a contract. When the creditor, let's say the trustees go out and they want a new roof on the house that the trust owns, and the roofer doesn't do his job, then they have the right to take that roofer, to a court and get restitution. So that's the basis of that. They have beneficiaries have certain rights, the trustees have certain rights, and the creditors have certain rights. And the ultimate goal is to trustees uphold the light of the trust and the ability for the trust to gain in assets and give the beneficiaries their fair share and their due that they have, and to make sure that all the creditors are also taken care of, and to deal with creditors who have skipped out or not, done their job as well. So this pot can get rather full, but there's remedies for everybody, and especially the beneficiaries. Okay, next. Okay, so we're back into the third parties again, and any debt owed by any third party by the trust is can be called upon. The debt owed, or let's say again we go back to the roofer, if he does a job and then the trust decides to skip beat, then that roofer has a legal right to sue the trust. So whenever if you're a trustee and you're dealing with contracting with outside third parties, make sure that the contract's clear and the trust does its work, and it does it honors the contract, and the third party also honors their contract. So that's the basis of that. Third parties can't breach the trust. They can't enjoin in a breach of trust. If, again, like the beneficiaries can be cut off for a period of time until everything is resolved. The same thing with third parties. If they don't do the job, they don't get the equitable payment that they deserve. And if a third party acquires property through a breach of the trust, then that can be resolved too. So hopefully none of this ever goes to a court or ever goes before anything. It's all resolved. So the basis is that the trustees, the settlor, and the trustees and the beneficiaries all keep their word and cause no harm. That's any natural law. Honor your contract and harm no one. Okay, next slide. Okay, who can modify the trust or terminate it? So termination is way down the road. We'll let that go. But modifying the trust, the beneficiaries have a right. If all the beneficiaries get together, then they can ask the trustees to change some of the process of the trust, make an amendment or add something or change something. And as long as it doesn't go against the intent of the settlor, the intent of the grantor, then everybody signs, an amendment is made, it's put with the trust documents, and it goes from there. When they can modify, anytime along the road, if they feel there's a breach or they feel that something's not happening properly with the trustees, and again, they don't go against the settlor, the intent of the settlor. Okay, next slide. Okay, so this is another one. This is, again, sometimes there's a, let's say there's a, the trust has bought a piece of property and it's really run down, and they just let that real estate go, and they want to abandon that whole property. So as long as the trustees and the beneficiaries agree on that, then that's proper. The same with the trustees. Let me check my notes here. So in other words, if the people involved with the trust, the trustees and the beneficiaries, all agree, then certain assets can be disposed of. In other words, let's say they're not as valuable as they were, then the trust can bargain that loss for potentially another asset that may enhance the trust part. So that's one of the things that can be done. And the trustees have the right to abandon certain assets if they are not providing potential growth of the trust. Another way for the trustees to help the asset base, remember that the trustee's duty, his fiduciary duty, is to the beneficiary. So he's always looking to make sure that the assets within the trust are continually enhanced. If there's an asset in the bank, or there's let's say there's a CD that was bought and it's not really valuable, they cash it in and take a little bit of a loss and take that asset and reinvest it into something else that they feel is appropriate. And that can all be done as long as the purpose of the trust is not torn up. The settler had an ideal of what he wanted to see for his beneficiaries, and he's put in certain assets, and he wants to make sure that those assets are enhanced for the beneficiary's benefit, and that goes on and on and on. So that may be through multiple generations. It may go only through one generation. In the trust document, there's a paragraph that the trust goes for 21 years after lives in being. And what that means is whoever the beneficiaries are now, if they're all alive, then they can get together and turn the trust around and do things and end the trust and say, we want to pull all the assets together and we want to have an apportionment of that asset base, and then we don't want to deal with the trust anymore. Sometimes what happens is that let's say there's 4 children, and then all of a sudden there's 12 or 15 grandchildren, and the trustees just think that, there's too much to handle here. Either we're going to abandon the trust, terminate it, and then we'll give an apportion ratio to the 4 original beneficiaries. Then each one of those beneficiaries can form a new trust and go from there. And therefore, it doesn't become overburdened. The wealthy, as Tanzan mentioned, every time there's too many trusts to handle, they take all the asset, they apportion it accordingly, and then every person that's gotten beneficial interest from that can form their own trust. Okay, that's that. And next. Okay, the beneficiaries, creditors. This is, again, this is a point that's really important, is that the creditors can't reach into the trust to get a beneficiary's beneficial interest. So, in other words, let's say a beneficiary has a right to receive $100 a month, and he doesn't play his card right, and he's owes $120. Well, the creditor can't go to the trust or trustees and say, this guy owes us more than what we've gotten from him, and we would like to have more. And the trustees can say, I'm sorry, you can only get what the beneficiaries get, and then you have to attach the beneficiary's interest, not the trust. And so that leads right into the spendthrift clause, which means that basically the same thing, that creditors can't reach into the trust to serve themselves, which go against the purpose of the trust. Next. Questions. This is my favorite part. This is where you get to ask me what it is that you would like me to specifically ask for your enhancement of either the trust you have now or the fact that you want to get one and you have some questions about the trust before getting it. Okay?
Okay, so everyone, if you have a question, you just click on the raise hand icon if you're watching by video, and if you wish to raise your hand via telephone, if you're on by phone, just press *9. And Randall, in the chat, we have a couple of questions. If the trustees live out of state, are they needed at the bank?
It depends on the bank. I don't know what's happening on the mainland, but typically now the complaint has been that the bank wants both trustees to sign the bank card, and they want them to present themselves with proper ID. So it's really getting sticky with the banks. I'm not going to comment on the political scene about that, but basically, we used to do it by mail sometimes. I had an account on the mainland, and even the bank card was signed with a notary here, and that was all done by UPS or FedEx. But now it seems that the bankers want you to present yourself, and they want to see a form of ID. So a way around that sometimes is, let's say you're in New York and your trustee is in San Francisco, is that the bank in New York may have a branch bank in San Francisco, and so you'll sign it with a banker in New York, and the trustees will show up when they can, as soon as possible, to show up at the bank in San Francisco. They will sign a similar bank card, and the banks themselves will coordinate the opening of the account. I know some people have done it, done a lot of the work by mail, and I know that some of the addendums that we've created for the trust, the people have either, you can do it two ways. One is you can send the trustees the addendum being made, and they go to the local notary, and then they send it back to the person that's requesting it. So that works out as well. And or you can do the original documents. So you go to the notary and you sign as one trustee, and then you scan that document and you send it to the person in San Francisco, and they walk in to the notary and sign it there. Or you just make a blank copy of each one, and each trustee goes to the notary on their own, and you have 2 pages of the document, but those can go together in the trust document book. Okay?
Okay, thank you. And Dominique writes, greetings. Here's some questions I think I know the answer, but I'd love to have confirmed. Number 1, can the trust have unissued units of beneficial interest?
No, it really takes 100%. So now that 100%, let's say I have a client this morning that's considering 10 or 20% for themselves and 80 or plus percent to her humanitarian projects. Let's say the money starts to come in and they want to have less for themselves and more for their projects. That can all be changed. So the trustees would get together and they'd say, okay, instead of 20/80, we're going to do 10/90. And that's just an arbitrary number. And those can change back and forth. You can even, some clients take 50/50, 50% for themselves and 50% either for their partner or for their children or for their projects. That's really open, and that's very flexible. And once you get the main trust document and it gets it all signed, then you can start to write addendums for any changes that you want to have happen. A new child is born, you might want to give some units of beneficial interest to that child as a birth gift. So it's all very flexible and fluid.
All right. Next is, can a beneficiary contribute to the trust? And if so, would units of beneficial interest be issued?
Well, they can do that, but typically it's not the beneficiary that's creating and giving to the trust. It's usually the grantor or the trustees that are putting assets into the trust. So I would say that if the beneficiary wants to give assets back, he could gift it to the trust, but I would suggest that he gift it to the person himself that he wants to do it to, or creates another trust and has another beneficiary.
Yeah, that makes more sense. And Dominique also asked, can you have units of beneficial interest and trust capital units, but both combined equal 100?
Well, the trust capital units or beneficial interest are pretty much the same thing. The idea is that you have 100% going out of the trust to one beneficiary or another.
Okay, thank you. And then PA writes, what incentive does a trustee have to work for the beneficiary? For example, if a beneficiary is getting millions, why would the trustee want to do all this work for nothing?
Well, he doesn't have to do the work for nothing. The trustees due a trustee fee for the work that he does. And before he even goes into signing as trustee, he can say, well, okay, I'm going to base my trustee fee on the percentage of business that we do and the percentage of money that's involved with this trust process. So no, trustees don't have to work for nothing. And I mean, you're working, there's only usually 4 or 5 people, or maybe sometimes 3 people. This is like a family, this is going to be a family relationship, and everybody has their due share of what goes on. Sometimes in the early days when there was minimal activity, our clients would take us out and we'd have a trustee meeting. It was just once a year, or even if it was once a month, we'd have a trustee meeting and the client would buy us dinner. And that was an equitable payback for what we did. So it just goes on. If the trustee is doing a lot of work, if you're doing more, fortunately, we have a new professional trustee service, and Dominique is, she's going to charge a fee accordingly to the amount of work that she does. The amount of work that the other trustee does is the same, equitable, or it can be more. In other words, let's say you're the trustee and you're going to do most of the work, and the only thing you need the professional service of the co-trustee is for acceptance of what you want to do. And she would sign the document or addendum, and it would go back into the trust as both trustees have agreed to do this minute or activity or action, and it goes from there. And as long as it's recorded, there's a paper trail, and the trustees have signed with good intention and no breach of trust going on, then it's all good and happy. So trustees are due. There's no problem receiving trustee fees based on the time spent and the energy spent, like anything else. A man is due his fair wage.
Okay, so Terrence writes, which member of a trust would open an account?
Well, today it seems to be that it's the trustees that really need to open up account. 20 years ago, banks would allow the manager to go in and open up account, but they also would like to have the trustees be on the bank card. And now, for sure, most banks want the trustees to be on that bank card.
And he says, which bank would you trust?
Find a private bank somewhere. But no, I've never had an issue with multiple banks that I've had my trust accounts with. So you have to trust in the universe, I guess.
He said, would you prefer a credit union over a bank?
It doesn't matter. I have both. I have 3 banks and 2 credit unions. And if you have a relationship with a banker, whether it's a bank or a credit union, that's the place to start. Work with the relationships you already have established. You have had a bank account with a particular bank for a period of time, then stay with it. Get to know the banker. And even if you're going into a new bank, you want to get to know the bank, the banker, the manager. Now, when you get into huge sums of money and wealth, then you're going to probably not be working on the retail level of the bank or credit union anyway. You're going to be invited or taken up to the private banking sector. When we were first working with Wells Fargo back in San Francisco, they really did have like a 13th floor. I kid about that, but and you had to have a minimum of like $2 or $3 million to open up an account. But if you did that, then you had a private banker, private wealth manager, etc. And it was a different story. You had gone right through the retail outlet and get in the elevator and press that magic button.
Come on upstairs with us.
Sure, we'll take you on a fantasy ride.
And Terrence asks, would it be best for a wealth blueprint to have a corporation wrapped in a trust versus a trust added to a corporation?
LLC or corporation, it depends on the intricacy of how it's tied up and how much of an asset base either one of those units has. Again, it's easy to add the trust as a member of the LLC, and you probably can take the corporation, the shares of the corporation, and assign them to a trust. So if you have a successful business going, then consider having the trust be a percentage of that business in whatever entity it's using to do its business now.
Are living men or corporate fictions added to a trust?
Living men?
Mm-hmm. I think he means as trust officers.
Yeah. The trustees are all alive. Usually what we do, we try to make sovereign human beings involved with the trust and not corporations or bankers, so that it keeps it from being statutory. So yes, live human beings who we want that have a level of consciousness and have a level of understanding about the trust and how it works, and it goes on accordingly.
It could be that he's referring to having a corporation as a trustee or a corporation as a beneficiary or a settler.
Sure, it's done all the time in the statutory field. Many times the corporations will be the trustees, bankers will be a trustee. They would love to have your business and charge you accordingly, and they won't hesitate to charge you whatever fees they want. So yes, I would say if you have a corporation that you want to, or let's say you might have a foundation, you can make that foundation a beneficiary or a trustee for your trust.
Of the 4 mandatory roles, how many can one person play, meaning the grantor, beneficiary, and 2 trustees?
2 out of 3.
2 out of 3.
You can be grantor and trustee, but you don't want to be a beneficiary. If you're going to be a trustee and a beneficiary, even if you're not the sole beneficiary, you can't be sole trustee and sole beneficiary. So you have a co-trustee and you have more than one beneficiary, then I would suggest you take advantage of our settler grantor service. It's a one-time fee, minimal one-time fee, and then it's done. And so you can have 2 hats out of 3. You can be a trustee as long as you have a co-trustee, and you can be a beneficiary as long as you're not the main beneficiary.
All right. Mata asks, can the grantor contribute additional assets to the trust in the future? If so, is there a time limit?
Yes, you can, and no, there's no time limit.
Thank you. And let's see. PA asks, if I exchange into an LLC, what kind of member does it become in the trust? Is it a trustee?
No. If, if you're going to make the trust a member of the LLC, then it would just be a percentage of the LLC. And then that goes into whatever's after the LLC takes all its deductions and has a potential profit. Then the percentage that the trust is involved, let's say it's 50%, then 50% of that profit would go to the trust. But they don't necessarily, they're not necessarily going to manage the LLC or be part of that process. I mean, I suppose they could, the trustees could be, act as managers for the LLC, but usually it's just a membership basis. Usually an LLC, there's one or two members and they run it, and the trust would be a member of the LLC and just receive potential profit. Same with a corporation, is that there would be corporate officers in the corporation, and the trust would just have a number of shares. They would have, depending on how the corporation's set up, they probably will have voting rights in the corporation.
PA, if I understand your question correctly, if you say if I exchange into an LLC, I'm assuming that you mean that the trust owns foreign currencies, and when they revalue, you exchange into a LLC. Well,
No.
I'm assuming you mean the LLC owns a bank account. You would have to have made previous arrangements for the trust to own, a majority of the LLC's assets.
No, you don't want to do that. You don't want the trust to be giving any assets to the LLC. The LLC is really a separate entity working on its own. If the LLC wants currency, then the LLC should buy currency on its own. It's not about flowing from the trust into the LLC. It's about the LLC flowing into the trust. Now, if you made the LLC a beneficiary for some reason, let's say that the LLC is not necessarily doing an active business, but you want to make it receive beneficial interest, then you could do that. But that's usually you're going upstream instead of downstream. So it goes from the LLC does the business, or the corporation does the business, and it goes up into or out into the trust domain, or it can be stored in an asset base.
Terrence Brannon would like to speak, even though he couldn't find the raise hand. So I don't know what happened to the icon. Terrence, you are unmuted. If you would like to speak, please go ahead.
Yeah, I just had a brief question about what do you know what the wealthy, like if they have all these trusts, I heard that the wealth blueprint was that the wealthy wrap corporations within trusts, and then they buy assets, and then the assets pay them on a regular basis. But would you say that's if the Rockefellers have 7,000 of these trusts, are they all with the same template that we can follow, or is there different templates?
Sure. Well, you're going to have possibly a number of trusts that will just operate a business. And then you'll have a number of trusts that will just receive assets and store assets and invest those assets. You may have, you're talking about multiple trusts, you might have a trust that just takes in cash, a cash portfolio, invested accordingly. You might have a trust that just deals with hard assets, gold and silver, etc. It just depends on your situation and how you want to play it. If you're talking about, we're talking about huge sums of money. We're not talking about, everyday, wealth across the country. But if you all of a sudden come in contact with significant wealth, then I'm suggesting first, like I just ran through this scenario the other day, is you first take that asset, however big, let's say it's significantly huge, you're going to have one account, and then you're going to sit with that wealth for a period of time, and then you're going to make a decision that you want to break it up in certain ways. whatever percentage it would be. It wouldn't be a number. It would be probably percentages of how you want that wealth to flow out. And it would come out of that one account, and you might create 2 or 3 trusts for certain things and 2 or 3 trusts for another, and can go on. I mean, you got to remember that the Rockefellers and these guys have been finagling this thing for 150 years or more. Does that help?
Yes, thanks.
Thank you, Terrence.
Mm-hmm.
And Joyce asks, what I'm understanding is things have changed, so the 2 trustees have to be present at the bank?
More than likely, yes, especially in the U.S. I had a woman client in England, and she didn't need any number, any tax number at all. And she walked in herself, and she opened up an account right away. So I guess it depends on where you are.
Yeah, it varies from bank to bank.
Yeah. So grab your trustee, take him out to dinner, take him to the bank, get him to sign the bank note, bank card, and then you're free to meander into the sunset. If you're into the Bahamas. Right, Joyce?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, somebody else?
We have a lot of questions in chat here. Someone says, will any bank accept this kind of trust, or is it this by trial and error?
I'm sorry, say again?
Will any bank accept this kind of trust?
I've been rejected by a couple of banks, but then like I said, I have 3 banks and 2 credit unions. That's all I need for now. Okay, you may have to walk around. Tons and I have discussed this a number of times, and you might have to shop for a bank that's really open to your consciousness and your flow of energy, and you just have to go for it.
All right, here's someone who was successful in raising the hand. 860 area code. You are unmuted.
Hi, Ben. Getting a tax ID number, doesn't that put it back under statutory?
No. That's
Next
just,
question is, good.
it just means that you've got a number because all the banks require it in the U.S. to open up an account.
And is that a service that you guys will provide?
No, I give you a really easy template to follow, and you go online, and it takes about 10 minutes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And then we have, I have 3 children who are beneficiaries, but do not know it. I did not think the beneficiaries had any say. The trustees are the ones who make the decisions, correct?
That's basically correct. And they don't need to know until you start to give beneficial interest out. In other words, you might have it set up so that maybe some of the beneficiaries are of age, they're a majority age, so that can be related to them. They may be underage and need a guardian. The guardians can be paid, and then it goes accordingly. Or they may not be paid. It may be something that happens down the road when you give up your body and move on. So you don't need to know. And if you want to inquire more than that, then it's something we can just do privately.
All right, here's a question. The answer is no, but I'll let you elaborate. Can the grantor or executor have signatory on the bank account, on the trust account?
It's possible, yes. And what you would need to do probably is you go with the trustees, and the trustees say, we want the manager to be able to sign checks on this bank account. Now,
Yeah,
some
not
banks,
as grantor.
no, well, they would sign as manager.
Exactly, because the grantor signed off all and relinquished.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And so they would become a manager, and there's a template for the manager agreement in the trust. You can use it or not. Um, and it depends on the bank.
Mm-hmm.
I had one bank on the mainland, and she said, well, you already have 2 trustees and there's no space for a manager, so I'm just going to put you down as trustee. And the case was solved and she opened the account. But that was one, as I had a relationship with her, and I, knew what she knew what she was doing, and it went from there. So it just, again, it depends on the bank. It depends on the bank whether they're going to open the account for you or not. If you don't like Safeway, go to Whole Foods or vice versa.
Well, Randall, as you know, I tell people that if the bank says no, they may have done you a favor because they may be so corrupt that you wouldn't want to deal with them anyway.
That's true.
Peter asks, if I am only one trustee and have a successor trustee, I can open bank account alone. So successor trustee is not needed to open bank account?
Typically, if the successor trustee doesn't do anything except sign the trust documents until they're needed. So if you have the form in your trust document that's you as the trustee, right on the front page, it's going to say you're the trustee and you have a successor trustee, and it gives a name. Now you'll have to take that signed document of the successor trustee with you. It have to be involved in a copy of the trust document. They'll want to know that there's a trustee that can step in, because they don't want to have an account open and have the trustee disappear and then wonder who the trustee is and who's in charge of the account. So as long as you have the form that says you're a successor trustee and the bank knows that, then you're probably going to be fine with a signature of one trustee only.
Yeah, the way it worked for me is I was successor trustee on my father's trust, and when he passed away in 2008, in 2009 or 10, I think it was, I walked into a bank, Wells Fargo, and showed the death certificate and the successor trustee document, and they made me signatory on the account.
Yep. It's pretty much how it works. Okay. Anybody else?
Go ahead and comment on other aspects of this knowledge while we're waiting.
Oh, well, I love that field of flowers, and I think the more fields of flowers that we get to play in, then better off we are. And the trust is an integral part. I mean, look at this metaphor right here. There's books and trees and flowers, and that's the whole idea with the trust, is this oversight of the trust, and a trustee is sitting in the field of flowers and creating beauty and harmony in the world. That's what we're trying to do with the House of Freedom Trust.
Yeah, I love that painting. It's by Maxfield Parrish.
I thought so.
Celestial Art, yeah. Paulette asks, I have a big family, 6 children, 5 siblings. Is it possible for all to be involved as beneficiaries?
Absolutely. You just have to list them. I did a client this week that had 9 beneficiaries.
So really there's no limit, I guess, right?
No, it just gets a little thin after a while. If you have 100 beneficiaries, you want to have a pretty large asset base. But that can change over time, and it's better, I said earlier, that once the asset base or the beneficiary base gets too big, then you terminate the trust, and then you give a pro rata basis to all of the current beneficiaries, and then they take care of the children and grandchildren from there.
Or if you want to have that many beneficiaries, maybe have many different trusts.
Sure, you can do that too. Goes either way. And I'm sure the Rockefellers, every time a child is born, I'll bet there's a trust that's created and an asset base started. Anybody else?
Dominique asks, can you explain the difference between a fiduciary and a trustee?
They're one and the same. Basically, the trustee is the name and the title, and trustee has a fiduciary responsibility to the beneficiary. So a fiduciary is somebody that takes responsibility for the asset base.
And incidentally, everyone, for those of you who came on after the beginning part of today's webinar, I announced that we're going to have a study group coming up. It's going to be a Zoom series conducted by our good friend Dominique Hackett in Santa Barbara. She's going to facilitate study of the various books that Randall has recommended, and anyone who has a natural law trust and is a client of House of Freedom and Brilliance in Commerce will be welcome to join. The first one will be April 10th, and we'll be sending out a newsletter about it, so please watch the BIC newsletters for that. 860, we have your hand up again, so I'm going to unmute you. Please go ahead.
Follow up to the last question. I haven't filed an income tax return in over 20 years. Is that going to be an issue if I go get the tax ID number for the trust?
No. And we have people that can help you with that process if you need be. In other words, the fact that you haven't filed, it's not an issue. The trust is a totally separate entity than you are.
Right. I was just worried about, will it raise a flag at IRS and have them look in my direction all of a sudden?
Not necessarily. You're too busy doing other things.
Okay. Thank you.
Good question. Thank you.
Yeah, and you know, Tanzan has a source for non-lawyers, people that can help you with any issues around the process of whether it's IRS or you know, some of the lawful process that the trust might have to go through. He has access. We have access to a number of people that can help with a number of issues, whether it's IRS or working with Canadian clients, and we're dealing with getting numbers through the Canadian Revenue Service, and clients in South America and clients in Europe. And so everything has to be fluid. And but the fact that pretty much everywhere in the world, the ability to have the right to form a contract, and it's in our Constitution that the right to contract will not be abridged. It's pretty much universal, and it's just a contract between you. Let's say you're the settlor, the grantor. It's between you and the trustees, and then the beneficiaries have an outside interest, and we can cover all the bases.
Paulette asks, how long does a trust generally last? And Paulette, Randall mentioned that earlier in today's meeting regarding the lives and being, but Randall, you want to run over that quickly again?
Yeah, it's an arbitrary number. It's gone from 21 to 25. Different books say at least 21 years. Some books just say 25, but 21 years after lives and being. So you and the beneficiaries are all born now. So 21 years after the last person that's a beneficiary dies, then the trust can be terminated and pro rata go wherever the beneficiaries would like it to go.
And why would it not be good to go on perpetually?
There's a rule against that. It's called the rule of perpetuity, and basically for a trust to be effective, it has to have a termination date.
Okay. Mata asks, does the trust document require that each beneficiary receive a distribution when another beneficiary does?
No, it's very discretionary with the trustee. So the trustees can give everybody that equal percentage, or are they, let's say one of the beneficiaries needs money for schooling, one beneficiary needs a little more money for health issues. So it can be, it's discretionary with the trustees, and that can happen. It's allowable to happen.
Okay, thank you. That appears to be the questions up at the moment.
Well, this is very invigorating. Must be spring. Okay, I'm done unless anybody has any more questions. As I say in my emails, further questions can come here.
Well, we're getting some compliments from people writing in, Randall, saying awesome. Thank you. So I'll just make some closing announcements, and if any further last questions come up, we'll entertain those.
I'll be
Again,
here.
our next trust webinar is April 17th, a month from today. That's a Wednesday. Same time, same station. Watch the BIC newsletters for the links. And I mentioned the study group. Subscribe to the BIC newsletter if you haven't already at our website, House of Freedom Trust with dashes between each of the words.com. Click on newsletter sign up. The phone number is 360-200-7521. We have Terrence asking, I'm very curious about One People's Public Trust. You want to say anything about that?
Oh, yeah, that was fun and games. Gee, I even forgot the date, but there were three of us, and I think it was 2010, and we had a good time. It was a trust that we formed, Heather, Giraffe, and Caleb, and myself, and we started to serve UCC statements on all the major banks, like the Rothschild Bank in Europe, the banks in New York, and we actually went to Europe twice to go walk into the banks and serve them papers, and we filed the UCC in Washington all the time, because the UCC is once you post it, it becomes a known fact. So when you call somebody's bluff, it's out there, and it's recorded, it's stamped, it's file dated, time dated. It was really fun. I learned a lot.
It kind of provided the legal structure, didn't it, for when the stolen wealth is repatriated to the people worldwide. It provides like a channel legally for that to happen, yeah?
Or at least. And I'm sure there are other groups involved that had their own filings, but this was a beginning process that we did to start to recapture and call the bankers on their invasion of the trust, the One People's Public Trust.
Mm-hmm.
It was a breach of trust by the bankers. I mean, obviously they didn't listen to the seminar when we gave it a long time ago on breach of trust, and they didn't care. So we made them come to grips with it. Now, whether they did or not, I don't know.
Well, all the news is indicating that the violators are being removed slowly but surely.
That's what I hear. And I see Mariana's, okay, Terrence just answered the UCC question, and it's a Uniform Commercial Code, and that's how all contracts are based. And there's a number of books, and if anybody's looking for that particular avenue, I have it here, and I'd be glad to turn anybody on to that need to know what the UCC is. I have the Reformed UCC manual here, and I just got 10 pounds of books again reading how that all works, but I can give you that connection. It's very, very positive, potent.
Well, okay.
Anybody else?
Thank you, everyone. This has been fantastic. Nice, short, and sweet. Well, shorter than some of the long ones we've done. Randall, thank you very, very kindly. Mahalo, merci, gracias.
Oh, you're very welcome. And thank you all, you folks, for showing up. It's my pleasure.
We'll post this on YouTube for everyone for playback for those who missed it.
Great. I'll be looking for next month.
Okay.
Adios, amigos.
Enjoy.